Oseo.
Oseo.
Greeting and wave the great feather. This is kind of continuing from last week and weeks before that. Last week I presented my painting that was Pyramid Lake, called One of a Kind. We brought it back down from Nevada to Yosemite, and from Yosemite down here to San Diego for Claudia's friend Catherine Harrison, who wanted to have that painting, which was celebrated in the month of March in a gallery in Reno. And so now that's where it is in her house. So I'm kind of continuing with that. Also, the month of August has been the Sturgeon Moon month. First we had Jim here, the Sturgeon Moon, and then up there in Yosemite we celebrated, one of our poets there, Deanna Beachley, that she was the Sturgeon Moon, and it fulfilled everything that is prescribed for the Sturgeon Moon month, including last week we had the Blue Moon there. And so if you're watching my talk from last Sunday, I included all that, including some poems from our Yosemite Poetry Festival. So I didn't say much about Pyramid Lake, and I want to say a little bit more about it, at that. Pyramid Lake, is there in western Nevada, more or less, and it's been named Pyramid by John C. Fremont, the explorer, who came down, I think he called it the northwest side, and saw the sun shining on the pyramid that's there in that lake. And it resembled the pyramid at Cheops, where he had been in Egypt and saw that. So that's how it got the name. But it also turns out to be something of a Freudian slip, because it turns out Egypt is their Pyramid Lake, and I'll show you a little bit of that. My first meeting with Pyramid Lake is from Vivian Olds. She lives up there in Wadsworth, and her father was born there, Pyramid Lake. Obviously her grandparents also, they had the Sutcliffes that's out there on the lake. So she's, I guess you could say, third generation Scotch-Irish kind of thing, like that. So she first took me out there, and what I experienced, and I try to put it that way, was memory. I experienced that here there was a memory. And this kind of memory, one way to say that, a literary piece by the philosopher Gurdjieff, Meetings with Remarkable Men, inspired a movie, a film, called, The Valley Obscured by Clouds, which means to come to a place that you have been before, but now for the first time. And so that was the kind of memory. In Egypt, there's the term zip-tipi. Everything has its first time. And then in the Teachings of Don Juan by Carlos Castaneda, what he's calling the edifice, the edificio, the encounter with the edifice, bids you to enter. And after entering, there's a guide to guide you. So that's all very much to say something of my meeting with Pyramid Lake, which then for me became a culturing, and going on and on through the years, also being at the schools there, the tribal schools and the county schools. I was an artist in residence, very, very much, and dreams. So art and education all came into it. It's a full-body experience. Over there at Pyramid Lake, to point out an edifice, this here, this is the Sphinx of Pyramid Lake here. And it is all painted with Egyptian hieroglyphs, very comprehensively. I was able to translate or decipher these hieroglyphs from the books of Wallace Budge, the late 19th century. His books were so startling there in England, they had to have him tone it down or they wouldn't publish it. So it was a shock. You have to realize, this country, the Europeans, all of that, they live in a very relatively narrow rubric, that is, anyway, I think it was Andre Malraux who wrote, if you want to appreciate a fishbowl, it's better not to be in it. Mostly Europeans and Americans are living in the fishbowl. So that's we call this the tufa mob. So it's a huge structure made of tufa. By the reports that I've read, this tufa was formed there when all the water was in there about 25,000 years ago. And whoever was painting the Egyptian myths in it, totally understood that. So here is all my, one of my paintings, of many paintings and things I did of Pyramid Lake, and to try and just sum up, concisely my knowledge from that, I put it up here. This original mine is the prehensile tail of our symbolical body. So that brings it all together. In short, Pyramid Lake is a culture and is culturable. Through the experience of it, something began to emerge. I would say like a persona. It became her. This persona would be more like Jung's anima. It would be like the anima. And it continues, and it continues. There's very, very, very much that I could say about it. There is in that lake a fish. I have this fish here to represent. It's called Coyote. Jean Hatari, anthropologist of UNR, did the report on Winnemucca. These two lakes, Pyramid Lake and Winnemucca Lake, are side by side. Winnemucca is called Winnemucca. It's an Arabic name meaning one moccasin. And that had one time been filled with water. And in that lake, the Coyote also lived. It lived in Pyramid Lake and in Winnemucca Lake. And what now in Pyramid Lake is the only place on Earth where this fish exists, and it is not known to be or to have been anywhere else. That's quite remarkable. And Jean Hatari's report is most interesting. As the water from the Ice Age, post-glacial, began to subside, people were already there, and they came down from the top of the buttes or whatever into the caves. There's a few caves that are around. They're all about 60 feet high, and the archaeology in those caves is what's finding 11,000 years. This area has been continuously inhabited for 11,000 years. But that's just the archaeology in the caves. Evidently there were people there already. In the middle of Nevada, there's what they call the Ichthyosaur Monument. It's remarkable to go there and see in situ, all spread out, in total, just the bones, is the Ichthyosaur. There you have a marine dinosaur, aquatic dinosaur, So at one time there had been a lot of water in there. The genus that the Coyote belongs to is called the Silurian. The Silurian is like 480 million years ago. So the dinosaurs is only 65 million years ago. So maybe the Ichthyosaur came from the Coyote. But it does say for a long time. My personal encounter with the fish itself, I would say it's more than a fish. There's a sense, a presence, you could call it anything. I've been on a couple of field trips out there. They have the Marble Bluff Dam, is what they call it. If the water isn't high enough in the lake to match the river, because the fish go up there to spawn, they have to have an elevator. They have an elevator to bring them up. So we've had student field trips out there, and then you have somebody, actually showing us, here's the Coyote fish itself. It's really a remarkable sense. It's the best I can do for it. And while there is not any evidence there, the people there are called, the Americans have called the Paiutes. They're the Numa. And if they had any myth or anything about this, either it hasn't been revealed or did not survive. The government, characteristic of the century of dishonor, the 19th century, death marches were all over the place, and the people from that lake were rounded up and marched to Oregon. And then after a while, President Grant granted them the lake so that they did come back. Nobody ever does a study on the trauma that's happened to people being torn out of their homes, their country. I happened to it at Cherokee, like that. But I'm just suggesting maybe other kinds of knowledge, because then you had, the forced assimilation schools, which was to absolutely, pound out any remnant of any culture that they could. So these things could have been lost or gone undercover. So all that this is the Coyote. But to sort of supply something in that lack, then I turned to Egypt. So there is very much evidence of Egypt. Martin Burnell in Black Athena, he's brought out the Aryan model. I definitely found that when I was in college, I had years of study, in this subject. I would say I definitely was hearing from the Aryan model. But a lot of more scholarship has happened since then. Even the recognition of African languages that are also Egyptian, so that language did not become extinct, and so forth. So in Egypt, of course, you have the Nile River, and then you have on the delta, you have the Mediterranean fish. You have much fish. And various of these fish were very celebrated or deified, and so forth. One of these, I have made this illustration here. This is Hatmatet. Hatmatet is her name means foremost of fish, so we would call her the fish goddess, or the goddess of fish. And here, this fish, the one that I portrayed here, this is Barber's beanie. Barber's beanie was, very popular, if I could kind of put that, over a long period of time. It's characterized by this barb-like dorsal fin and very large scales, and all kinds of, everything from jewelry to even mummified this fish. They have in bronze. I mean, everything. This fish was replicated and venerated, over a long period of time, like that. Best, you could wonder why. It seems to be associated with Osiris. So I portrayed her like that. Up here, this is another fish, and this is Yenit. Yenit is a symbol of the sun. It's also called chromis. You can see why. So Yenit is a symbol of the sun because she could, kind of take the eggs in her mouth and hatch them in her mouth. So then the baby fishies, could be seen emerging from her mouth like that. So in the Egyptian myth, Egyptian very concerned with the afterlife, the person goes to the afterworld, which is water. And so they saw, the little fishies coming out, and this really seemed like the sun was born from the primal lake. This is the primal lake. Here, this is I made a duplicate hieroglyph. This is a hieroglyph for the primal lake or the primal water. Again, the name of hieroglyph is Greek. A lot of these words are Greek. But the Egyptian word for it is medu-neters, which is something like divine qualities. So similar here with the Sphinx. The Sphinx is a Greek name, basically, monster of the lake. But the Egyptian name for it is Hu, meaning the creative word. And with that, Hetu, creative imagination and magic. And so that's pretty much what's governed all my experience, I can try to call that, here with it. Here you can see, and this is the other side of the lake, I've made it there. This is what the pyramid looked like to Fremont. The sun shines on it sometimes, and it does look like that. So very, very much, the hieroglyph of Vast is there, and Kheper, and Temu, the deserts. And this place, the west is what you call it from Egypt, is called the Duat. And everything that the Duat is supposed to be from the Egyptian point of view, evidently some people went or came out west to find it. And there's plenty of evidence that they did find it, and Egypt is very much here. Egypt, the languages, Libyan, and so forth. There, where I found this, I should mention this. I put this here because I had a dream, of many dreams, in the pyramid. In the pyramid, it showed me inside the pyramid there was an implement. In the dream it looked gold. But my recognition of this is a stone tool, somebody made it, that I found over there by another site, the Salt Cave. And it's called, the fishtail knife, and that's peshu kef, like that. And this was in use for a very, very long time. We see it, in the tombs, the burials, even before the pyramids. And it was hafted, so it had a handle on it. In my dream, it had a handle on it. Nobody knows what it was for, but most likely a ritual very similar to the Tibetan rituals that have daggers and things and do rituals with it. So that's the guess of it. And I put it here for one to say something of my dream pyramid link, and also because of the name fish. It's a fishtail knife. So I could, bring in all of this about the fish. While the God religion ideologies, definitely took over the Mideast, the Mediterranean, and knocked out Egypt, So all of this knowledge has only been recovered, in our later times. Like I said, barely in the late 19th century. And more has come out. I think the Black Lives Matter kind of thing may have also loosened up. A lot of people are afraid to publish things because of that. That's the other thing. In the fishbowl, then you would have to realize this fishbowl we're talking about is prompted by a racial myth. And if you want to be something within the fishbowl, don't make waves. So you got to see how all that's governed like that. But over in India, I presented this a couple of weeks back, India also has, the divine, the sacred fish, Matsya. Matsya is the divine fish, like she is or was in Egypt there. And it's continued, although it's ageless. I mean, from who knows how many thousand years ago, would seem mostly all over the human world, the fish, the ancient fish, has been venerated and celebrated. Look how old it is, 480 million years old, like that. So, in this one, in India, Manu. Now, the biblical thing, just has Adam and Eve. There's, Mr. Man and Mr. Woman kind of thing. Doesn't seem to develop that any farther. The name man or mankind, does have an etymology. And in modern times, more and more, that's kind of discouraged because it really sounds like Mr. Man, which is not what its etymology is. Well, in India, you have Manu. Manu would be rendered like that, modernly, first man, but it really means more like first person, first human being, but not just like that. It has more to it. Manu is an aggregate of potential further thoughts, future thoughts, many. And their attributes are their ideas, their emanations are their ideas. So that's very interesting because that gives a lot more elbow room. Well, so just this to say how the fish got started over there. Manu was, somehow in the Tuolumne River up there in Yosemite. And a little fish, came along and said, save me, and I'll save the world. So he had his water pot, and he scooped her up and put her in her water pot. This is a Hindu water pot with Matsya in that. Matsya becomes the savior of knowledge because she sort of gobbles up, the demon of ignorance, so that knowledge has been saved. So, save me and I'll save the world. And so she still lives. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, I brought in another effigy from India to show that she is still venerated, as, the fish avatar, basically. and there are idols, made of her. So I'm going to finish this up. This is all, more an introduction of something that's, deep as the blue sea. This piece is called Fish, and it's by Lauren Straight Eagle Feather. One day, Bear stops to talk with the singing river, awakes her. She is the river with 1,000 star eyes. She rises to those furry paws, and she sings, "Shh, whisper, Bear, my children are coming." Children of the river, the fish, are the source of food and inspiration for us. The spiritual essence of the fish is that it can breathe underwater. As a supreme member of the element of water, the fish is the symbol of current and flow, living life actively within the wetness of the earth. Like a bird, fish flies through the water, and as a person, it can be meditative in its silent stillness. A being of darkness and of depth, as well as light. A slow and fast mover in the streams, rivers, ponds, and lakes of Turtle Island. Oh.